Hi, I'm Rainer and welcome to my train room. As you saw, I got 3 more bulkhead flat cars that were delivered for my lumber yard. And I thought I would do some work around this yard to work on the scenery and get it looking a little bit more detailed. So there's a few things that I want to do. The sawdust burner over there is very shiny plastic. Got to get it painted and weathered to make it look less plasticky. I want to get some rails for this crane to ride on. And I want to do a little bit with the ground cover over here, put some gravel down, maybe some pavement over here and things like that. I also have a 3D printed resin forklift that I need to paint that needs to go over here for loading the trucks, things like that. If you noticed in my recent video, I actually have some logs here. Now, this is probably the only lumber mill that is making lumber out of lilac logs because I needed some logs for this and I wanted to go trim the lilac bush in the front yard. So as I trimmed it, I thought some of these branches would be just about the right size for logs. So I just cut them up and cut the little buds off of them, and I have logs. Maybe they're not totally accurate, but the bush needed trimming and I needed some logs, so I got both done. Anyway, that's kind of my plan. I don't know exactly what I'm going to end up doing here, but I'm going to start working on this scenery. Like I said, probably some pavement over here, some gravel. I'll be putting some weeds in, things like that around the edges of the track, and just trying to make it look a little more real than this brown painted plaster here. So let's see how this goes. So this is what I've accomplished over the last few days. I started out the scene by clearing all the train cars out of the way and all of the kind of movable pieces. And I started by covering this parking lot area, or this lot area, with acrylic flexible modeling paste. So the stuff that I used is this Liquitex brand flexible modeling paste. And I just used like a palette knife, they call it. Artists use them, and spread it over the whole area. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. So after I let it dry for about 24 hours, I painted it with black acrylic paint. Turns out I didn't really need to do that because I wasn't sure how much that was going to show through to the next step. So that was just completely not necessary. I painted with black paint, but ended up not needing to do that. Once the paint was dry, I gave it a thin coat of this acrylic crackle paste. And this stuff's kind of interesting because it's designed to crack as it dries. So the thicker you put it on, the more the cracks develop. So that's why the first coat didn't have to be perfectly level, because this stuff is what I kind of leveled it out with the best I could. And so where it ended up thicker, it got some wider cracks, and where it was thinner, it ended up with some narrower cracks. So again, let it dry, let it harden up. It dried a little faster than the other stuff because it was thinner, but still needs to be kind of left overnight to dry properly and harden. Then the next step I did was to give the whole area light sanding. I just used a little foam sanding block and just take the ridges out of it because it's supposed to be a parking lot, and then just vacuumed it thoroughly. Then I painted the surface with a black acrylic paint, making sure I got it into the cracks and everything. And then I gave it a few coats of kind of more gray paints, but those I didn't press down into the cracks, so that way the cracks would end up showing up nice and black. Once that was all drying, I installed these 2 rails for my crane. The elevation of the ground underneath here, this side was a little bit lower, so I ended up putting a strip of wood underneath it so that the crane sits kind of level. Glued all of that in place, ended up having to put a few pins in here to hold it until it dried into place. I've had this crane for 50 years or more. My dad bought it for me when I was a kid, so I really wanted to use it on the layout. So I thought this would be a good place to put it. The original plastic rails that came with it, I lost those somewhere along the line, but that's okay. They wouldn't have been long enough for this scene anyway. So I put a couple of extra chunks of just Code 100 rail that I pulled off some track and just glued those down. So my next step was to ballast these two tracks right here. They're kind of my log delivery tracks, if you want to call them that. And I have a ballasting tool that I printed. I got it on Thingiverse, I think, and I printed it with my 3D printer. Works really well. Just set it on the tracks, pour some ballast in it and slide it on the tracks, and it gives you a layer of it on there. And then I just use one of these little glue brushes to kind of spread it around. For these two tracks, I decided to try something different. Instead of regular ballast, I had some of this jar of gravel that I bought from the dollar store. It's actually $2.25 at Dollarama. It's just fine gray gravel. It's a little bit shinier than I would like. But once I use the matte medium and put other stuff on it, it kind of gets rid of the shine. So I just thought I would try it and see what it looked like. Worked okay. I kind of dirtied it up afterwards to make it look more realistic. When I put it down, I spread all of the ballast in place, then gave it a light misting with one of these, with some isopropyl alcohol in one of these misters. I got a couple of these on Amazon, but my first one I actually bought it at Michael's, and they're not a regular spray bottle that you would buy for normal scenic things, because they don't actually pump the liquid through the pump. They actually pump air into the bottle, and then that air pressure forces the liquid out through the nozzle, and it's a nice fine mist. When you push it, there's kind of a little bit of a delay and it mists it out. I like it because it's a finer mist and it doesn't give that hard blast that blows all your gravel everywhere. But you still need to back off from whatever you're spraying at, but it seems to work pretty well. Once I gave it a soaking with isopropyl alcohol, and that's just to relieve the kind of surface tension of the glue and water mix. And I just use a little squeeze bottle like this. I use Liquitex matte medium for my glue for everything for this stuff. And I just put kind of a little bit at the bottom here and fill the rest with water, shake it around. And then I just dribble that onto the tracks everywhere and give it a good soaking while it's still damp with the alcohol. And what the alcohol does is this doesn't bead up on the top. It just immediately absorbs right in, gives you a nice even coverage of glue. So that's how I end up gluing down all my ballast. The next step was that I started adding some long grass, weeds, various things like that along the edge of the parking lot, or like at the edge of the edge of the pavement here, to kind of blend it in with the hillside. For the clumps of grass, I again used matte medium, not diluted, and just used clumps of grass and just set them in with my fingers. And some of this other vegetation is just polyfiber, or some of that reindeer moss, as they call it, that I just misted with my matte medium and water mixture, and then just sprinkled some ground foam on top for the look of foliage. So I kind of did that, and you'll see as I go through this, I would add some vegetation, some grass, do some other work, add some more grass, because like I've said, when I've done some of these other hillsides and things, it's all about adding layers. And whenever I'm working on it, I realize I need to go back. Oh, I need to add a little bit more. And I keep doing that. Now, the next step, I wanted some variety in the ground cover. I didn't want to cover it all with this black pavement. So I had some brown ballast that I bought many years ago in a container. It really isn't the right color ballast for any of my track. I'm not even sure why I bought it at the time. So I just thought, let's see what happens. So I just spread that over this whole area evenly, and misted it with alcohol, and again soaked with my matte medium and water mixture to glue it in place to give a nice hard gravel surface. But it was very brown. So not quite the look I was looking for, but it was variety from the pavement for this area. So that was what I did in that area first. Once I had this in place and this had started to harden, I started working on my little roadway leading into the mill. And this road is going to lead from my village that's kind of off camera, but so this is the beginning of the road, and there's a little rail crossing here because I'm going to kind of be parking my cars from here in. So you have to have a road to get into your mill. So I did that. Did it the same way again, used some of that modeling paste underneath for a layer. This time I didn't paint it black, I just let it dry overnight, and then put a layer of that crackle paste on top of that. That's how I ended up doing this. But When I first did the modeling medium, that takes time to dry. So while that was drying, I decided to do some weathering of the building. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I wanted to do something with my sawdust burner, and this is like the powerhouse. So I took both of those and did some weathering on it. So this one, I ended up spraying with the airbrush some Tamiya dark iron, kind of misting it on, a very diluted mixture, and then as well some flat brown, kind of gave it sort of a, yeah, just a coating of those to take away the shine and just add a little bit of a kind of a rusty sheen to the outside, or a rusty kind of a covering to it. And then later, when I was actually doing some spraying, I ended up hitting it with a little bit of the isopropyl alcohol on the side, and it actually gave me a kind of a nice effect on it that I wasn't expecting, so that one actually worked out really well. Then this building, it was just painted this kind of light gray, primer gray color, silvery gray color, and it just looked a little bit too perfect. So what I did was I just kind of randomly brushed on some old Floquel rust paint, and then immediately kind of gave it a wash of some dirty, literally dirty old diasol that I had cleaned my brushes with previously. And that kind of diluted the rust and gave it this dirty look. I did that on the roof here, and then as well as on the walls, and it kind of gave me this look of a building that's kind of dirty and starting to rust a little bit. So I'm happy with how that turned out. So then I put both of those in place, and since it's a sawmill and supposed to be a sawdust burner, I thought that real sawdust would be a good thing, so I went and dug around under my table saw and scooped up some sawdust and brought it in and spread it around over here and along the sides, as well as some little chips of wood, things like that. Again, gluing it all down with a misting of alcohol, and then dribbling my matte medium and water mixture on there to harden it up. So that's how I did that. That's actually real sawdust back there. And then it was a little bit too gritty, so then after that I also had some fine kind of a light beige or brown ground foam, so I sprinkled some of that on there and in here, and I also sprinkled little patches of it on top of this brown gravel here to kind of lighten it up and not make it this nice solid even brown. So I just wanted to change it up a little bit, and I did some of that. Then I turned my attention back into the parking lot, and some of these cracks, what I did was I took a really small brush and put a little bit of matte medium and just kind of put little lines of glue essentially in some of the cracks, and in some of the cracks I put little clumps of static grass in. Some of them I sprinkled some of that little bit of brownish ground foam, some of them the green stuff, and then just the idea was I would let that dry, and that was just to give an idea of kind of the impression of dirt and moss and grass being in the cracks of the pavement. So that was my goal for that. And then after I got that done, I just went around and added more clumps of grass around the building and along the side of the tracks and in between the rails, and just kind of everywhere, just to make it look like a bit more of an older property that's not perfectly maintained all the time. Once all of this matte medium in here holding this stuff was dry, I left it for a few hours. I came back and trimmed some of the grass that was sticking up from the parking lot, because I don't want it to be the full 12 millimeter. I want it to be a little bit shorter. And then I took the vacuum and just cleaned up all of the extra that I had sprinkled on there, just leaving the stuff that's stuck in the cracks. Once I had cleaned that up, I went back to my roadway over here and added a layer of crackle paste to the top, again leaving it to dry. And then in the morning I came in here, gave it a light sanding again, same ideas over here, painted it with some black acrylic paint, and then put some gray over top. I actually came back to it a little bit later with a little bit more gray, because I really wanted the black cracks to stand out, because if it's all a uniform color, you don't see the texture quite the same. And at the same time when I was doing that, I decided that my gravel was still just looking a little too even. So I added with the brush, I just took some black and gray paint, kind of brushed it along here, because I'm kind of envisioning that, vehicles will be driving in and then going along here. They could be going here or coming in here and parking to go to work. And so I just added a little bit of black and gray acrylic in here to kind of add a little bit more dirt and age to the gravel. And then I also brushed a little bit of the darker acrylics onto the ties and the center of the tracks and onto the ballast over here to just kind of dirty it up and make it look like it is actually a used old area and not just bright, fresh, gray ballast. And then of course I just went back and added more clumps of grass in various places beside the roadway, things like that, just because I just felt like I needed to do more of that. So, and then I decided I'll do a little bit of static grass. So I actually used the static grass applicator, put a little bit of a strip over here. And because I had put some of this light ground foam over here, I didn't want the grass to be falling on there. So I put some paper down to just kind of protect when I did it. Put some static grass in here, static grass along the front here. Now this part is still going to get more vegetation on it, probably some low stuff. I need to make up some shorter trees. I don't want to totally block the view of the sawmill, but I do want to get a little bit more kind of vegetation on this section here. So for now, I've got the static grass and a few other clumps of grass here. For my static grass, I just use this undiluted matte medium, put that down for glue for the static grass. And the reason I like using it is this stuff doesn't dry like normal white glue. It kind of dries evenly all the way through, so it doesn't create a skin on top. So even the cheap static grass applicators work fairly well, because with white glue, if you don't do it quickly enough, it gets a little bit of skin on top, and then the grass doesn't actually pierce the surface of the glue, and it ends up laying down more than you want it to. With this stuff, it stays liquid for a lot longer before it hardens up. Then I just decided this hillside over here was just the brown painted plaster. So I pulled the trees out and did the same kind of work that I've done on some of my other hillsides. You can look back at some of my older videos if you want. I added a couple of rocks at the bottom. I used some of the foliage netting on the side, added some polyfiber material and other things like that, just to build up a little bit of vegetation and layers on the hillside. And then I put the trees back in. So it was just an idea to cover up the hillside and make it look like that's kind of a hillside that's just growing wild there beside the road as you're coming into the mill. So I will do more of that up here, but for now I just was concentrating on this area, the area beside my road, so that I could get that kind of looking complete. So some of the final steps I did was I added the trees in here, and then I cut some scale lumber, which I ended up staining with some acrylic paint wash. Didn't like it, so then I actually painted it with some more of the same Floatwell rust paint and some more dirty diasol. And these are just kind of the parts in between the tracks at the road crossings over here and over here. And then I put a short section over here in my lumber yard as well. And just, again, added more little clumps of grass, did some more cleaning up. And so that kind of brings me to this point. So what I'm going to do now is I've got to wait for glue to dry, because there's a few clumps of grass that I put in just a little while ago between the tracks that I need to trim down a little bit shorter once the glue is actually dry. And then I will roll some trains back into this area. So I will end the video with some trains coming in here once I get those little clumps of grass dried. And as always, thank you for watching. One more type thing. This forklift is actually a 3D printed, resin printed unit that I bought from a seller online. So I painted that as well as a log loader for my logging area up there. So I will have another video coming up, a short video just showing how I painted those. But I got that ready for this scene as well. So anyway, as I was beginning to say, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and see you next time. And now watch some trains rolling back into the lumberyard.